So as the colonies get going, one of the problems without having a hierarchy is a threat from or hostility from the poor. And like we had mentioned earlier before, the poor are coming from London cities or British cities down here from in England. Many of the poor are from Ireland and the Scottish. The poor are sent to the New World as indentured servants, and as soon as they finish, they either find their new land, but as time goes by, it's very hard to find their own land that that isn't good for farming. Much of the good land is already being taken, and so therefore you have these indentured servants being pushed further out into the frontier against the Native Americans. As I mentioned earlier before, you also have some Puritans who are trying to establish their city upon a hill, meaning that they're trying to make a society of godly people who are self-disciplined in their vices, hardworking, and a very uh, they try to control themselves in a very disciplined manner, and they want to make a society that is a godly society without any tradition of the Catholic Church or even the British Anglican Church. But as many of the servants that find themselves free don't find themselves land, they're pushed out onto the frontier and they're forced to live the frontier life. The frontier life is constant conflict with the Native Americans. The colonies living along here, the West, like that. Further east, they like that the frontiersmen are the ones who are fighting with the Native Americans, and that allows for like a buffer that isn't necessarily threatening the new established colonies and the cities or the towns. There's small disputes between them escalating to attack. There's no support from colonial governments. As you're fighting with the Native Americans, uh, the local governments, including Virginia, are not helping them push the Native Americans back. And if there is any land, especially in the Ohio Valley, that is available, many of these elites are using their investments to buy that land, and it makes it too expensive for these servants or these poor freemen to have access to that. They have to become self-sufficient, and eventually they move up into the Appalachian Mountains, and they develop their own identity and their own individualism out there in the frontier life. But they would like to have rather had a better life with tobacco farms and so forth. But like I mentioned before, many of that has already been taken up by the elites. The next problem they have is that the elites can still face the possible poverty. Without having a structure of hierarchy, there isn't a concept of status. That means that within someone's lifetime or the next generation, the wealth of the land can be lost by competition of others. So what they found out was that some of these indentured servants, when they finished their indentured servitude, they made their own land or their own plantations. They bought their own servants, and in so many cases, they moved up in society. So this is very problematic. Having wealth and having status is too fluid. It's too interchangeable. We have the example of one um, black indentured servant by the name of Anthony, who not only becomes free and owns his own plantation, but becomes a prominent member of society. So without having that hierarchy, like I mentioned before, there isn't that established status for yourself or for your future generations. This is considered unstable and would lead to conflict. So there isn't any real such thing as an elite at this time. There are a few of them, but um, they don't feel that their foundation of their wealth is established at this time. So the problem is that a hierarchy is needed, but there are no nobles. There's no Catholic Church to support the idea that the nobles are above people. There are no rules for status. People can gain wealth and challenge the power of the elites. Um, and you have a lot of people who are at the bottom, a lot of poor, who can threaten your livelihood and your life if they feel that they're not happy. Um, so the idea of a hierarchy is not natural. It doesn't work. I use this. Some of you know the concept of some professors out there today saying that hierarchies are natural. They must be constructed, and they cannot live without a myth. So that is a challenge for the early colonies, and we'll see how they develop that in the early America. So we find an early indication of that problem with what we call the when we do find that the frontiersmen, the poor farmers, the landless farmers, and the indentured servants, and the black freedmen all kind of unite together in a small rebellion called Bacon's Rebellion. And in Bacon's Rebellion, not only do they attack the elites, but they run out William Berkeley. And their main gripe is that how the government has not helped, William Berkeley himself has not helped on pushing the Native Americans out. He's given land grants to friends, and there seems to be an inequality growing between the top elite and the poor. One of the things that the elite are finding is that they don't like the idea that all these different people that have grievances of not finding life fair can rise up and attack them. So we have an early example of violent class warfare that is exactly what happens when there isn't a hierarchy to help structure society. Um, Berkeley comes back with more enforcements from Great Britain. The rebellion is stopped. Many of them are forgiven, but some of them are killed. And Bacon himself dies of dysentery, of which is very common at the time. And so the threat of the poor rising against the rich is still lingering. So they need to find a way of establishing that hierarchy. So we're going to look at colonial culture at the time. We have frontiersmen. Most of these frontiermen are ex-servants, indentured servants who find themselves without land. Many of them are the Scottish and the Irish coming over here that are not given any opportunity because they're seen as low status in terms of their breed. The good land is already bought. We have Bacon's Rebellion here in this threatening manner. So what the colonists find is that they need a middle class. In the Middle Ages, the middle class was developed by what we call guilds. So they're going to employ the same thing. They're going to create a middle class and help establish a buffer between the poor and the elite. They need a new type of myth, and we're going to see that they're going to invent the concept of slavery, that's supposed to be slavery, and racism, how the two work together. And racism is going to be a combination of this concept of breed and race. So this new mindset or this new myth is that not only do you have certain people that are not of certain higher stock or of value, but now tied to the race, most importantly, the color of one's skin. So the new hierarchy is the elite have now established themselves by creating a permanent work class with slaves. And the myth that they're going to implement, and it takes quite a long time for them to implement this concept, is they're going to combine their ideas of certain breeds with skin color in the case of blackness. And now Virginia began to pass laws that these black indentured servants are no longer servants for 7 years, they're servants for life. And they start to enforce this concept that is their natural state of being. And so the new myth becomes the concept that people from Africa do not have ideas of civilization, are not meant to live in conjunction with other people, and therefore should be permanently put into a lower status. What that does is that creates a sense of separateness between the poor farmers of the South and the low-skilled workers. As bad as their situation is, it could get worse. So you begin to establish a type of status and worthiness above one or the other. The elites are going to protect the professional artisans. They're going to create licenses and recreate this concept of guilds again. And so it becomes a sort of unspoken culture that this new middle class knows that it is being created from the elites, from the universities, of establishing lawyers and establishing doctors from the universities and creating certain types of guilds. So their loyalty is going to be from the elite to the elite, and they offer a nice cushion and a buffer. So you have this sense of human nature in which one does not want to be associated with the other. And to combine this with Calvinism, the idea of being blessed and the idea of non-responsibility, you have a mixture of early colonial culture in which these divisions become hardened, where you don't have a sense of community or necessarily where you're going to have a rebellion from these groups anymore. The slaves are not going to or these guys are not going to help the slaves in a certain type of rebellion, and they are not going to help the middle class is not going to help the lower class with the rebellion against the elite. So this is the foundation of the early colonial hierarchy.